Hello, this is True Crime Nightmare and I'm Jane Reid. This is episode 25. This is the tragic case of Deborah Linsley, who was known as Debbie by her family and friends. Debbie was murdered on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 23rd of March of 1988. She had been stabbed to death on a train which was travelling between Pettswood and London Victoria stations in Greater London. Her murder still remains unsolved over 32 years later. Debbie Linsley was 26 years old at the time of her death in 1988. She had been born in 1962 in Bromley, London, England. Her parents were her father, Arthur, and her mother, Marguerite Lindsay. She also had a brother called Gordon. Her father was retired but had previously worked as an insurance broker up until his retirement. Debbie's mother worked as an investigator for the Fraud Department of Social Security Services. In 1988, just a few months before her death, Debbie had moved out from the family home. She had moved from London to Edinburgh in Scotland. She had just begun a job as a trainee hotel manager in a hotel in Edinburgh. Debbie Linsley was close to her family and often went back to London to visit them. She also had many friends who she would often meet up with as well. Debbie had also got a new boyfriend. She had met him when she had moved to Edinburgh, and it was a very new relationship. Debbie is known to have enjoyed her job and had been excited to be attending a training course for hotel managers in London on the afternoon of Wednesday, the 23rd of March 1988. She'd been dropped off at her railway station, which was Pettswood Station in London. Her brother only worked around the corner from the station, so was happy to drop her off on his way to work. She boarded the Orpington to Victoria train at about 2:15 p.m. Her train was due at Victoria Station at about 10 to 3 that afternoon. It was not a particularly long journey, and Debbie was known to have been very familiar with the trains, and she had lived in London most of her life. The trains in England at that time were the old-fashioned type. The carriages could only usually be accessed via the platform of the station. Passengers could not freely walk from one carriage to another like they can today. If you got on and decided that you did not want to stay in that carriage for whatever reason, you had to wait until the next station. You would then have to jump off the train and move along the platform of that station to access the other carriages. The carriages, not surprisingly, were all replaced due to health and safety concerns a few years later. So a passenger once on the train literally had no way of getting help apart from pulling on the emergency alarm cord or button. This would alert the train driver to a potential problem, and an emergency stop would be done to try and establish what the issue was. Thankfully, they were all replaced, and you can now move to another carriage and summon help a lot easier and also a lot quicker. But in 1988, although the trains were updating their carriages, a lot of the trains still had the old type of carriage. Each compartment would typically allow for up to 12 passengers, and there were separate carriages for people who wanted to smoke. Debbie Lindsay was a smoker, and she chose a compartment that allowed passengers to smoke on the train. Also, unless the conductor or the ticket inspector decided to enter a particular carriage, you would typically not see any railway worker on your journey until you got off the train at the station. Once the train had reached its destination and before setting off on its return journey, a railway worker would walk through the train and check all of the carriages. This is how Debbie's body was discovered. The Metropolitan Police were notified and arrived very quickly to the station. The whole train was treated as a crime scene, and the services on that line were cancelled until forensic officers and the police had finished collecting any evidence that could lead to an arrest in the future. Debbie Linsley had been stabbed 11 times. She had stab wounds to her face, neck and her abdomen. There were 5 stab wounds close to her heart, and one had actually pierced her heart, which led to her death. There was blood everywhere. Debbie was lying in a pool of her own blood, and the carriage itself was saturated in blood. It had been a very violent attack. Debbie was fully clothed. She also still had all of her jewellery as well as some cash on her. The police were baffled as to the motive. There was no sign of robbery or a sexual assault. Once the tests had been completed on the blood that was discovered at the scene, it was found that although obviously most of the blood was from the victim, there was another person's blood found as well. Debbie Linsley had put up a struggle. She was found to have many defence wounds on her, and it looked as though her killer had somehow also bled at the scene. Debbie Linsley's family and friends were all devastated at what had happened and struggled to find a reason as to who would want to hurt her. Debbie had been staying with her parents at the family home because she was attending a training course in the local area at the time. She'd also come to London to attend a bridesmaid dress fitting. Her brother Gordon was very shortly due to get married, and he had asked Debbie to be a bridesmaid. She was apparently very excited and looking forward to the wedding. Her family said that she was excited about what was happening in her life with her job as well as being a bridesmaid at her brother's upcoming wedding. Debbie Linsley's funeral was held on the 22nd of April of 1988, just under a month since she had been stabbed to death so brutally. Her funeral was held at the Holy Trinity Church in Bromley, London. Debbie was buried in her bridesmaid dress, the dress that she was supposed to wear at her brother's wedding. She was only 26 years old when she was killed. The senior investigating officer of the original inquiry was a superintendent called Guy Mills. He later described Debbie's murder as savage and brutal. He stressed that the fact that due to the carriages on the train, she did not have any way of escaping her killer. She really would have been trapped, and although the carriages all had emergency buttons or cords, she possibly could not reach it if she had been suddenly attacked without any warning. Superintendent Mills also stated that due to the nature of the murder, he did not believe it was the killer's first murder. The police looked at all possibilities and asked for any potential witnesses to come forward with any information that could potentially help put a very dangerous individual away. Although there was thought to have been about 70 passengers on the train at the time of Debbie Linsley's murder, only one person came forward with any good information. A French au pair who worked in London was travelling in the carriage next door to Debbie's carriage at the time of the murder. She later recalls hearing a woman screaming shortly after the train had left Brixton Station. The French au pair said that the screams had been blood-curdling and that she really thought that someone was being attacked. She was asked later by the police if she had thought that, why did she not pull the emergency cord? She would not have been able to reach the carriage itself due to the old-fashioned style carriages, but she could have alerted someone to the problem. She replied that she had not been able to react and that she was glued to her seat. If this witness is telling the truth, why did she not try and do something? In fact, she only came forward after she realised from the news that a woman had in fact been murdered on the train that she had been travelling on. She did not even try to summon help when she got off the train at Victoria Station, which was only a short distance from Brixton, where she had reportedly heard the screaming. The journey from Brixton to Victoria only takes about 6 minutes. She reported that she did see a man aged between 40 and 50 with gingery hair and a moustache getting out of the carriage that Debbie's body had later been found in. The French lady said that she had tried to follow him and that he seemed to have a limp and that he was a heavy-built man. However, due to the fact that the station was very busy, she lost track of him. This potential witness would rightly be criticised at the later inquest. The police did actually manage to get an EFIT description done of the man that she had allegedly seen getting out of the same carriage that Debbie Linsley's body was later found in, but nobody ever came forward. It is strange that despite doing nothing to help after she had heard screams coming from the carriage next to her, that she would then try and follow the man who at this point no one knew even that a murder had even occurred or that anything had happened, and she followed him through a busy London station. Why did she not try and get help from staff either on the train or at Victoria Station itself? There are always railway staff around at the major stations, especially in London, and the police narrowed the time of the murder down to very close to when the train had arrived at Victoria Station, which was just before 3 o'clock that afternoon. A few other potential witnesses would also come to light, but no real strong suspect ever emerged. A passenger at Victoria Station at roughly the time the murder had been discovered saw a man with a cut on his head who was trying to clean his wound up at the sinks in the men's toilets at Victoria Station. This was looked into further, but no one was identified, and the man himself did not come forward to the police. Out of all of the approximately 70 passengers that had been on the train at the time of the murder, the police managed to track down and eliminate 60 of them. The others who had not been traced did not come forward themselves either. It was also all over the news and at the time, and the case had also been featured on Crime Watch UK television programme. A murder on a train would have been very unusual and still is unusual today, thankfully. Another potential suspect was an unknown man who had been reportedly staring at various women at Orpington Station. Orpington was where the train had begun its journey, heading towards Victoria Station. This man has also never been traced. In fact, no one has ever been arrested or charged with Debbie Linsley's murder, and there is not even a prime suspect in the case over all of these years. The murder weapon was considered to be a kitchen knife type of weapon. The blade was thought to have been between 5 to 7.5 inches long with a heavy blade. The police investigating this murder case have so far taken over 1,200 witness statements over the years. Everyone who has been questioned has ultimately been ruled out. As is typical in this sort of case, family as well as friends and other people known to the victim were also looked at. They questioned her new boyfriend, who had been in Scotland at the time of the murder. They spoke to a man who had only a short time before offered Debbie a job at his hotel, but nothing ever came of it. Debbie was on her way to meet this man, and he was ruled out as a potential suspect early on. Debbie Linsley had been attending a management course for hotel workers and had met someone there who had offered her a job. He had links to the Sherlock Holmes Hotel, Baker Street in Marylebone, London. It is believed by those close to her that Debbie wanted to take the job because she wanted to move back to London and close to her family and friends who she missed. This new job would have been perfect for her. There were no suspicious circumstances with the job offer, and the man who had offered Debbie the job was not found to have been involved in her murder. Over the years, with the advancement in DNA, a profile has been discovered from the blood left at the murder scene, but unfortunately the person whose DNA was left at the scene has not been added to the database. Does that mean he has not committed any other violent crime, or that he just has not been caught yet? Who knows, maybe time will tell eventually, but at least they do have the DNA profile. With the advances in familial DNA as well, there are even more chances of catching killers. The murder weapon was not found either, so the murderer must have taken it with him after he had murdered Debbie. He obviously came prepared as well. He presumably had the weapon with him when he got on the train. Did he also have a spare change of clothes? Because the amount of blood and the brutal nature of the murder would likely leave the killer bloodstained. If he had got off the train bloodstained, he would in all likelihood have been apprehended, or at the very least tracked down later. Did he get changed in the carriage after carrying out the murder and put his blood-stained clothes in some sort of bag. Who knows? The case was shown on the popular crime programme Crime Watch UK on the 14th of April 1988. The murder would have been very fresh on people's minds, but nothing came of it in regards to catching Debbie's killer. A later inquest into Debbie Linsley's death was held on the 16th of November of 1988. The French au pair was called to give evidence, and she repeated what she had already told the police. She was criticised, and rightly so in my opinion, by the coroner for not trying to help by pulling the emergency cord. Unsurprisingly, the inquest returned a verdict of unlawful killing by person or persons unknown. After the murder, British Rail, who were in charge of the trains at the time, put a few more safeguards in place. The new safeguards included ordering the railway guards to patrol the trains more frequently and to be particularly observant for women travelling alone. Also, passengers were advised to be more vigilant and to report anything suspicious to the correct authorities at the time. The Metropolitan Cold Case team have taken another look at all of the information that they have on the case. They also now have a DNA profile to work with, which could help if a suspect does ever come to light in the future. The police have also put up a reward of £20,000, which would be available to anyone who has any information which leads to the arrest and eventual conviction of Debbie Linsley's killer. Sadly, Debbie's mother, Marguerite, died in 2013 without ever finding out who had murdered her daughter. The police have also found it strange that they have not been able to link the DNA profile to someone. Usually, if someone commits a brutal murder, they do not just change their ways. They usually will at least become involved in some form of violent crime. The police investigating Debbie's murder have always said that they felt that the person responsible was a repeat offender and would likely commit another similar crime. The police know that Debbie Linsley had got on the train at Pettswood Station after having been dropped off a few minutes earlier by her brother Gordon. She had bought a packet of cigarettes before getting on the train, which was heading towards Victoria Station, her ultimate destination. She was arranging to meet the man who had offered her the job at the Sherlock Holmes Hotel. So she should have been at Victoria Station just before 3 o'clock to meet him. But of course, she'd been murdered, possibly in between the Brixton Station and Victoria Station itself. The police also discovered that during her relatively short journey, she had smoked 2 cigarettes and had also had some of her lunch. She had sandwiches with her. They also had a witness who had apparently heard the screaming just after the train had left Brixton Station, which only allowed a short time for the murder to have taken place. They also know that the victim had arranged to meet a man regarding a job opportunity at the next stop, Victoria. Debbie had been staying with her parents at the time, although she was actually living in Scotland. She had spent the morning with her family before heading off to her meeting that afternoon. Hopefully someone will eventually be convicted of her murder and her family will get some justice. There does not seem to be an obvious motive for the murder. Also, if only that witness had got help rather than basically ignoring the situation, then there is always a chance that Debbie Linsley would have survived. Debbie did not do anything wrong. She was just using the train to meet up with her potential new employer. She had so much to look forward to, and she had a very good family who she was very close to. The potential for a good life was great, but sadly someone else had other ideas. I really hope that someone is caught and put away for the brutal murder of Debbie Linsley. Credits for this episode go to Wikipedia. A YouTube channel by Molly Westbrook had some very good information in, and also www.mylondon.news. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.